Hello. I think that miniature sculpting is a genuine art form, one that's too often overlooked, and that we should do more to celebrate the incredible work that's done to create those joyful, wondrous, magical things that make the wargaming hobby possible in the first place. My guest today is a prolific sculptor who has worked in Games Workshop retail before finding his way to historical miniature sculpting and fantasy miniatures as well. We talk about the business, the art, the science, the techniques of creating miniatures, the materials, the tools, the processes, and how all of that comes together to create wondrous, amazing things. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with miniature sculptor Paul Hicks. Paul, thank you for joining me, and we're going to be talking a bit about the act and the art of sculpting. I think you're actually even working on some miniature sculpting right now as we talk, so I'm sure we'll see some of that. But I like to start from where you began, sort of in the hobby. And so whether it's miniatures, sculpting, the arts sort of side of things, where did you begin your journey?
Well, my journey in miniatures started, I think I can sort of trace it. One of my earliest memories is being told to stay away from the loft hatch at my mum and dad's house, where they still live, because my dad, I think, was and mum at the time were building a model railway.
Right.
I think it was under the "It's for the boy," but I think they started it when I was about 2, which was like for a detailed model out, and I can always remember it being there. So I think it was primarily for my dad, to be honest.
Right.
So there's always been models. There's always been Lego when I was growing up. So I think it's always been there, and I can always remember being. I mean, I'm a kid of the 70s and 80s, so every birthday there was at least a model kit.
Mm.
And kind of got upset when I was 12 when the model kits were replaced by Lynx gift sets, and it was like, oh, I don't want this. Yeah, so I think that's where it's came from.
Mm.
That I was always building model kits, or there was always something miniature. I was always sort of getting down to the level of the little people on the model railway, so that was always my view of
Right.
things.
So it was about the. I mean, has it always been the fascination with the actual like models, the miniatures themselves, rather than like playing with them?
Yeah, definitely. Because I can always remember going to military museums. I mean, again, having being at that age where everyone probably had a direct family member that had served in the Second World War. I was sort of fascinated by that. So we went to a lot of military museums, and seeing the models on displays drew me more to seeing actual, tanks or planes. Thankfully, the Science Museum in their aircraft display still have a lot of the models in there, which is still fascinates me to this day.
Yeah.
How can I think it was more of a how can someone make something so small just by eye, and that had a magical element for me.
Yeah.
And that's always something I wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So did that bring you to like Games Workshop and Warhammer and that sort of thing?
So, whoa. Well, I've always built models, and then I think when I was at high school, we found out I then got the gateway drug thrust in my hands of White Dwarf. I can't remember. I think it was White Dwarf. It must have been an early 101 or something. I had it had it was when the Harlequins first came out, so
Sure.
they were and I absolutely looked over that all the time and read as much as I could. And then I found out, because I lived in West London, Ealing, so the nearest Games Workshop was the Darling Road Hammersmith store.
Right.
I used to, my school was in Acton, which was only one train stop away from Hammersmith. So you after school you used to go there and then buy the odd figure. Um, and then that's where it all kind of started, really.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, and then I think the first pack of Citadel miniatures I got were from there. I think we're like the Space Marine Rhino Tank Riders
Oh yeah.
set. Yeah. Back. Yeah. So yeah, that's where it all started. But I kind of flitted between military models or Games Workshop stuff. It was never sort of. It was more about building and painting and
Right.
gaming. Yeah, and
Sure.
still is really.
Yeah. So how did that then go from? Because I mean, I believe you worked at Games Workshop at one point as well, didn't you? You went into sort of
I
retail
worked
space.
for in retail. So in that time, I still had a fascination for military figures because I kind of really like the large scale military figures.
Right.
So that again was a real, how people could paint those and make them look so realistic. And
Hmm.
there was some library books in our school library about making military models as well that I used to take home all the time. So I would get like I've never been satisfied with whatever I could get. So it was if I had a Tamiya model like a 1/35th scale figure, I would have to cut him up or add or change a Second World War figure into a First World War figure. So that's where it started.
Hmm.
And my ambition completely outstripped my abilities. So um, and then sort of that's where it snowballed of just cutting bits up um, and then sort of then going into what I really wanted to do was go work into like models for special effects
Right.
in films.
Right.
So I kind of went into the art side at college, at school and college, did well in art, didn't do well in anything else. And then thinking that media studies would be the right way to go, found out about halfway through that wasn't the right way to go.
Right.
So, and I should have carried on the art side, and then I just completely dropped out. And like many people that sort of dropped out and had an interest in Games Workshop, ended up working for Games Workshop in their retail side,
Right.
thinking it would be making models and painting figures all day instead of doing actual shop work.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, do you remember what the sort of vibe was like back then? There was, was it
Yeah.
pushing
So
the sales or?
well, I did end up doing a work experience in the Hammersmith store
Hmm.
because, funny enough, my dad had met someone who he worked for on a site who worked in special effects in Acton, and he was talking to him for ages and said, "Oh, my son's really interested. Can you do a work experience with him?" And I was speaking to him for ages on the phone. He was giving me loads of advice. And then I said, "Oh, I'll be down for my work experience." We talked about it. And he went, "Oh, I didn't say that." And I was like, "No." And it was like the week I was absolutely devastated. I was so excited. I told all my friends and it was going to be great. And because I'd been going down to the Games Workshop, I said, "Oh, can I come and do work experience here? I haven't got anywhere to go." And they went, Yeah, no problem. Um, yeah, the vibe then was really, it was like the cool place to go. So all the miniatures, I think it looks kind of, it was all people's armies, and it was convert, their own stuff, and it was all, yeah, it was really mysterious. And if you went, you were in the club basically. Yeah. So when I first started working, it was very much, it was just before the red shirt started to come in. So I did a bit at the Oxford Street branch, and that was the manager we had then had the bright idea that we were all going to wear the Terminator shoulder pad design t-shirt. That was going to be our store t-shirts. No other store had their own t-shirts. Oh, and combat trousers as well. That was going to be our store uniform. Right. This was back in '92 as a part-timer.
Right.
Yeah. They were really good, fun times. But as a 16-year-old going out most nights, I was getting funny looks from my mum and dad when I was getting home. Yeah.
Did you get to do a lot of the sort of building and painting miniatures that you'd hoped?
No, you was stocking shelves and doing the stuff,
right.
Especially as a part-timer, doing the stuff that they didn't want to do.
Sure.
Or they went out and had a fag break, basically. Because it was, how much did it cost? It cost, how much was I being paid? £2 an hour. But it costs, and I had 6 hours a week, so it was £12 I was being paid. And it must, a one-day travel card must have been about £2.80 or something.
Right.
For the day. So I was, if I worked a Saturday, I was only taking like £9 home.
Right.
So to be honest, it was more going just somewhere to hang out, really.
Right.
And then I went to college, dropped out of that, and then walked straight into working full-time with Games Workshop, really. Where did I start? Back at the Hammersmiths branch, I went 2 weeks there, and then I moved to Harrow.
Right.
So basically all the stores I ever worked in have closed down. So I don't know if that's I was the kiss of death. And then, I worked in and then went to the Oxford Street branch where I met a really good friend, Andy Hobday, that I do a lot of work with now. Build up loads of friendships, have lasted, 30 odd years. Then did a bit of managership, and then just realised this isn't really for me, and left to sell wooden floors.
Right.
Which also had a.
Well, by that point, then you'd been doing all the sort of the kit bashing, and like you were saying about modifying miniatures and sort of doing that.
Yeah. So during that time, I was collecting miniatures and painting armies. I think the sort of first ever sort of Games Workshop conversions were with the RTB01 box of Space Marines.
Right. Yeah.
And the first conversion was turning the hand round of one and then making it, getting him to give the finger.
Right.
An Ultramarines army that I painted up, lovingly painted up, and it was in the Plaza Shopping Centre store, and it was on display. It was quite big. And then I went in one day, and it was the day before they were doing Games Day, and I turned up, and they'd packed it all away, and I went, "Where's my army gone?" And I went, "No, it's gone to Games Day. They've taken it." I was like, "Yeah, but that's my army. That's not a shop army." So on Games Day, I went up to one of the tables where kids were playing with the armies, and I went, "No, that's all mine. I'm taking that back. I've got the cases. Thank you very much." There was nothing. Yeah.
Right. How did that go down?
Yeah. As a 16-year-old, no, they're my toy soldiers. You're not playing with them. Yeah.
So, I mean, you obviously you mentioned you sort of moved into wooden floors, which I imagine is quite a different industry and a very different vibe.
It was. I'd got really bored with working in stores because they were like 1-2 man stores at the best. And by that time, I was never one of those. I was probably a really bad employee, to be honest, because I was never really fully with the, shout war lots. And yeah, so I kind of just, we weren't really allowed to paint. Well, we weren't allowed to paint our own stuff, but soon, because there was nobody coming in, I would paint. I had a huge Empire army that I painted while I worked at Games Workshop.
Right.
And funny enough, we sold loads of Empire figures because everyone turned up. They were like, "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm painting this," and I was infused about it as opposed to the latest sort of release that was coming out. And we sold loads of that kind of stuff. So it kind of had a back. But the wood flooring it's because one of my gaming buddies worked for a wood flooring company and said, "Oh, come and work for us." And I went from manager's pay, which was about £8,000 a year, because Games Workshop never paid well, to the bottom of a wood flooring company as a sales person at 15,000 with commission. And I was like, yeah, great, I'll have some of that, thank you very much.
Yeah,
And then
wow. And when would this have been? Was this mid-90s?
No, this was 2000. I left in March 2000. Yeah. So I worked.
So even that late, it was still 8K for a manager.
Yeah. It was, and that was with 8K. Might have been 9.5 with London waiting.
Right.
So you got an extra 1,500 for your travel for being in London.
Right.
So, but in that time, I'd always been converting figures for this Empire army. I'd converted quite a lot of figures. And I got I built up a little group of gaming buddies, and one of those guys I was really good friends with. When I got to the wood flooring company, I still dabbled, and we still gamed every Monday. And he bought a miniatures company called Gripping Beast. His name's Andy Sherwell, and I was converting figures, and then he asked me and a good friend of mine at the time, Andy Dormer, if we would like to try and convert figures and add them to his catalogue. And so we did. I mean, yeah, they kind of looked a bit woeful, but at least we were giving it a go. And then in 2000, I was doing that maybe on my day off from the wood flooring company. I would go there, hang out. And then in 2002, a company called Battle Honours UK. I think Gary Morley mentioned that he worked for Battle Honours.
Right.
So years ago. So they asked if me and Andy would like to do a range of First World War miniatures for them. And I'd been doing bits and pieces, but this would be the first ever range that would be mine,
right,
or ours. And I went into the wood floor company and I said, "This is what I want to do. I've been asked if I do this." The numbers seem to work out, and they said, "Yeah. Well, if that's what you want to do, we know you're interested in that. Go and do it." I spoke to my mum and dad, and my dad just went, "This is always something that you've wanted to do. Same. If you don't try it now, you probably won't look back and regret it." So I did, and yeah, that's where it kind of all started in 2002. Yeah,
right.
And it was a bit of a struggle, and there was a time in, I think it's 2004, where it just was not, the numbers weren't adding up, and then the wood flooring company out of the blue got back in touch with me because they were very good employees. So and my friend was still working for them, so I popped in every now and again. And they just said, "Oh, look, we might be opening another branch. Would you come back at full-time pay, but you can work part-time so you can sculpt your figures?" And I was like,
amazing.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. So, but in that time, I'd sort of started to be more competent, and doing it day in and day out, you start to to produce stuff a lot quicker.
Yeah. So it's
Uh,
amazing then. So you never sort of had any kind of like formal training in sculpting miniatures. A
no,
lot of it seems to be
no,
from
no.
hobby and then doing it on the job, learning on the job.
Yeah. So the wonderful thing is, I had there's a good friend of mine, Andy Dormer, that we both started sculpting at the same time. I mean, he was always so much. He could always find that little trick
Right.
of how to do things, and so we would just be sitting next to each other in the Grip and Beast studio in Richmond upon Thames, and he would do something, and then I would copy it, or he was always he was always the one who could work out how to do things, and then I was kind of the copycat.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and then your mind starts to think that way, so you can think about how to, you know, you start off by sort of finding shapes. You look at things as shapes,
Right.
and then you can then work from there. But
Yeah.
it's just things we found out ourselves. It's like, I've still got it here now on my desk, is a metal box with a light bulb in to speed up the drying time of material, so I don't have to wait 24 hours for it to cure. It's sort of ready in a half an hour.
Wow,
um
that's major difference. So I mean, what
yeah.
material are you using then as your sort of standard sculpting
well
medium?
I I use a product called Procreate, which is which is now not produced anymore, and I've got 3 packs of it left.
Right.
um so I'm starting to use that mixed. It's very similar to green stuff, but I could never find that I could get green stuff to work for me.
Right.
So I used it for quite a few years, and then somebody gave me a sample pack of this Procreate, and I'd run out of green stuff one day, and I had to get these miniatures, so I just got this sample pack out of Procreate, and that worked really well for me.
Is that
Um,
I mean, when you sort of talk about, okay, I can't get the green stuff to work quite as well, and the Procreate
yeah,
works better. Is that like the give, or like how it responds to your tools, or what's the sort of
yeah, it was more.
the
So I always found green stuff to be like real chewing gum.
right?
Well, this Procreate just seemed to be a bit finer. Um, but what I'm now doing is mixing this with a product called Magic Sculpt,
Right.
which it's very similar to adding milliput to green stuff that a lot of people do, and you get a, a, a much sharper finish, and also you can carve it as well. Um, which is, yeah, it has its bonuses. So if I need to produce something that has a bit more rigidity to it, I'll use that mix. But
Right.
it's not as forgiving if you make a mistake. So if I make a
Right. Okay.
mistake, what I'll generally do is I won't do anything. I won't cut it off, or I won't try and sculpt it. I will cure it in my box, my light box, take it back out, and then ping it off, because I
Right.
work in layers. So you'll do like the trousers, and if you do like at the bottom of a coat and it doesn't work so well, I'll put it in, dry it off, take it off, and then just ping it off and start again.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I get you. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, that's fascinating then. So, but when you talked about seeing things in terms of shapes, right?
Yeah.
Because one thing I'm not really artistic in any way at all when it comes. Yeah, I can't paint, I can't
Yeah, but
draw.
you write and you produce. It's all part of
Sure,
being
but
artistic.
in those terms of like I guess shaping something, so shaping a
Yeah.
visual thing, and it's intriguing to me about how you build an actual miniature, right? So it's almost you get this sculptor talking about, I think it's the Da Vinci talking about like the statue's already in the material
Yeah.
and I just need to find it and uncover it. Are you doing that where you're starting with the material and honing in on the miniature, or are you building out the miniature?
Well, so I don't know if you can see, that's
Sure,
what I'm
okay.
starting off with. So these are pre-made. I'm a lazy sculptor, so I don't make armatures. I've got bags of these made
Right.
already. So that's what I will start off with, and I think I sent you a picture of what I'll be working from.
Right. As a
An
piece
image.
of artwork, yeah.
Yeah, as a piece of artwork. So when you're saying about is the like Da Vinci saying that it's already there, I was thinking about this because we chatted at PeachyCon,
Yeah.
and I always find it easy to sculpt strangely when you know exactly what you're sculpting.
Right.
So you know what it should look like at the end,
Okay.
that you've got a definite picture of what it's going to be like at the end. When I don't have a definite idea of what it will be like, it will never, I can kind of tell from the first time I work on that project, it's going to give me trouble.
Right.
So if I go in and try and do 8 figures without having a definite idea of what they're going to look like, they're going to take loads of time because there's never a mental picture of what they should look like in the end.
Right.
That makes
It
sense.
does, yeah, yeah. So you're sort of imagining. I mean, is it something that you imagine, or do you sketch it out, or you're using the reference images? Sort of where are you
Well,
getting the lineup from for those miniatures that you're working towards?
so I'm primarily a historical war game sculptor.
Sure.
So for me, it's a lot easier to produce because the reference is already there.
Right.
Um, Now for the customer, the client will always give me a list of what they want, and I'll immerse myself in as much if there's documentary stuff on
Hmm.
YouTube. If there's a particular film, so I've just done some Royal Napoleonic Royal Navy figures for Brigade Games in the US. So I pretty much had Master and Commander on repeat,
Right.
which it kind of it's a great film, but it also it seems so authentic. So
Hmm.
it's easy to sculpt along to something like that, and you get a real feel, and then the characters that you're producing evolve, and yeah, they're like you said, they're all already locked into the sculpt.
Right. Sure. Well, actually, it raises an interesting question, I suppose, around the historical aspect of the job.
Yeah.
So, do you? I mean, you mentioned immersing yourself in stuff, using those references. Like, how accurate do you find that things need to be? So, is there a creative license, I guess, in sort of getting to the best miniature as opposed to the most accurate representation of a given
But
historical person
I'm
or
quite
soldier?
I'm quite fortunate that if I watch a film, a historical film,
Mm,
my wife hates watching historical films because as soon as I see a detail that's not right,
right.
bang, that's it. I'm out. No, can't take that.
Right.
So going back to the historical stuff, when I was a kid, I always wanted to make things look historically accurate. I was always so I love doing webbing or the equipment on soldiers
Right.
and stuff, and trying to make those as accurate as possible. So for me, there is no artistic license
Right.
because it would take me straight out of making figures. So I started a small company called Bolt Action Miniatures back in 2005,
Right.
which Warlord went on to buy.
Right.
Uh, and I was very much into trying keeping things looking sort of kind of non-heroic, which is the way that the range has kind of gone now with
Sure.
Warlords. So I'm very much I try and keep things as authentic looking as possible.
Hmm.
Not saying that people don't like that the heroic style has its own merits as well, but that's just how I like to keep the for myself as a
Sure.
sculptor. That's what I like to be able to recreate, because it's always been a case of trying to make something big, going back to when I was a kid,
Hmm.
was what is trying to get that big thing. That was the the magic, was making something big into
Sure.
something tiny. And how did you do that? And I think that's how my brain works, really.
Right. Yeah, I get you. Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, and when you talk about that sort of heroic approach, I guess, is that
Yeah,
in terms of, so that might be flourishes and like inaccurate detailing, right? And that sort of stuff. Is it in the almost the dynamism and the posing as well, or is that a separate thing?
I think it's more in the posing, because there's
Okay.
yeah, it's just in the posing of figures that you kind of um so I would like to don't know. Yeah, if someone's working an artillery piece, I want to represent it as the drill instructions would be.
Right.
And I think in a heroic way, I think there's a way of displaying it in a more chaotic, under pressure way.
Right.
Um, so yeah, the two styles have merits on the gaming table.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because part of me wonders about, when it comes to historical miniatures,
yeah,
how much of it is, and I imagine there's a mix of both here, right? But
yeah,
some of
yeah,
it you might want to create the look of an army, almost like you say, in the sort of drill on parade,
yeah,
all stood up and looking very, very clean and stood to attention, sort of thing.
yeah, yeah,
Versus, I imagine there's also a desire to create like, well, if we're going to be doing some historical wargaming with these, or we want to create dioramas or that sort of stuff, we need people in action who are doing things, who are fighting, who are
yeah,
taking cover and whatever. So do you tackle both of those? Do you do different
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
sculpts on the both
So
sides?
yeah, so if you're doing something like 18th or 19th century, where there was, the drill was how you fought a battle.
Right,
A customer would normally ask for a set of figures that will be between 4 and 8 figures, all marching.
hmm.
So what I would do is I would sculpt a figure, which is kind of the industry. I don't know if you can see that. It's
Just
without
about.
arms and a head, but
Right,
all of the equipment is done. So that
right.
allows me to have that marching pose, um, which will be
So
to
you
represent
duplicate
that.
that. Right,
Yeah. So to make the unit look authentic, they all need to be stepping in the same
of course, yeah.
on the same step. But then when I'll have all the weapons and all the headgear made, that they'll come. I can then add those on, add new different faces, different looks, and then that's where the character comes in.
Hmm.
Uh, and I find that the real enjoyment for me is sculpting faces and being able to put character where actually it's it's hard to show character in like 8 guys marching, but you might
Right.
have one looking over his shoulder like, I don't really want to be here, kind of look.
Yeah.
And the one that's like loving life, this is his best life ever. And then there is also an element of pew pew and around the workbench with them as well, because you want to put a little bit of story into them.
Hmm.
Otherwise, there's no enjoyment in sculpting if you're just making the same figure in. And the good thing of doing them without arms and heads is that I've done the equipment only 4 or 5 times,
Right.
so it's consistent. Because if by the 20th figure, if you're doing the same pocket or the same bag or the same pouch,
Right.
the you could be the best sculptor, you just get bored, and
Sure.
the you're just stabbing stuff by that stage, and it's yeah, the quality's not there.
I
Yeah,
mean,
so
how long does it tend to take then? So if you're doing, so say that's the job. You're doing 8 of these guys. They're marching in
yeah,
order, but you're going to be adding, extra detail to them and the character. What's the kind of time it takes to actually sculpt up a set of miniatures like that?
I couldn't really put a time on it,
Right.
to be honest. Um, some days I've done 4 in a day, and some days I've just got, oh, I can't. You know, it depends. It depends on how I'm feeling.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. It could. Generally, yeah, between sort of maybe 3 and 4 a day.
Right.
Yeah, just to make them look good. Otherwise, you're just rushing it, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Is there a lot of give in the material? Like, can you? I know you talked there about like if you made a mistake, you'd cure it up and take it away.
Yeah,
But can you like rework? Is there a limit to? Is it like working with pastry, for instance, where you sort of a limit to how much you can work it before it changes
yeah.
consistency?
Yeah, yeah. So if I don't do it in the first pass, I'll scrape it off because I'm working on layers.
Hmm.
The layer before is already cooked off, if you see what I mean. So I can just scrape off and then just start again. And 9 times out of 10, I'm not doing it so much now because it's a precious material that I can't get anymore. I would just roll it up and throw it away
Hmm.
because re-kneading it, you kind of, it's never as nice as when you've got a freshly rolled piece.
Right.
And after 20 minutes, it starts to go off some that you can't get a fine edge, so that goes as well.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just putting stuff on and it's not taking the cuts or the detail that you're adding in,
Right.
and it's not worth having.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So there is like a certain amount of time pressure there, I suppose, that's sort of adding to that.
Yeah, but I work on about between 4 and 8 figures at a time,
Hmm.
and fortunately, in the historical side, where I can just put them in my little heating box, do that bit on one, put him back, do the same on the 8 figures. And
Right.
by the time I got round to the eighth one, I go back to and do the next process on the first one. So it's a conveyor belt of
Sure.
sculpting.
So it's
So
like
it's
batch painting, but for
yeah, yeah,
sculpting up
yeah.
stuff.
It's
Yeah.
like batch painting, but yeah, you've got to have a bit of industrial kind of work ethic with doing
Hmm.
it. Otherwise, yeah, you'll get bogged down and distracted by other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting as well. Almost like you almost, there's a manufacturing process in a way. There is an art to it for sure. And
Yeah,
it's a very creative work to undertake.
yeah,
But there is also that business side of things, right? I mean, you mentioned the sort of bolt action and it's, that sort of creating that range and
yeah.
selling it onto Warlord. I'm curious about the sort of broader, almost the economics, I suppose, of being a sculptor in the sort of the world as it is today, and not working for one of the sort of the big monolithic companies, but sort of forging your own path.
Yeah. Well, I've been very fortunate. I think I've come in at the right. I don't want to say the dying age of hand sculpting, but
Right.
there's
Yeah.
there's there's not many of us starting, and I think I was fortunate to be able to be one of the last of those guys to
Hmm.
come through. And working for lots of people when I started has really helped. Like Brigade Games in the US, I've been working for since 2007. So, and then having long established um, relationships with those companies. And also, I have a set amount I need to make in a week.
Hmm.
So I write down at the beginning of the week what I need to make, and then I make sure I get to at least about 90% of that done. Um, and then we're always looking for. So bolt action was good, but it just became too big for me and a guy called Simon Bardry when we started it, and Warlord came around at the right time to sort of,
Hmm.
you know, look at taking it off of our hands and have really run with it,
Hmm.
which has helped. But then that helped us buy put a deposit on a house and move to Buckinghamshire, outside of come out of London. So
Hmm.
but you've just got to make sure you've got to be focused on what you do and make sure that you get your weekly targets done.
Yeah.
Of But I always consider myself retired. So if I wasn't working in a wood yard, I was sculpting and making figures. So, apart from filing my taxes once a year, this is what I would choose to do with my life anyway. So, I'm very, very fortunate to be doing something I love every day,
That's great. Yeah.
and yeah.
Do you ever get any like almost like a writer's block, like sculptor's block? So you're looking at the material and you're just like, I cannot imagine what to do with this.
Well, yeah, and then that's where things like rugby come in,
Right.
uh, and sort of doing exercise and things like that completely clear the mind,
Sure.
reset, and then you can sort of go back into doing doing the work, because
Hmm.
it that completely destroys any kind of block, and then I'll watch something that will trigger, and then I'll get back into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one thing I suppose you mentioned the sort of, you've got the references and it's a bit easier maybe to find loads of references for
Yeah,
a historical miniature. You've
yeah.
also done some fantasy stuff, and most
Oh, yeah, yeah,
recently
yeah.
with Baron's War, you've done a fantasy
Well,
sort of Kickstarter, right? Is that
yeah,
different?
yeah, yeah. So, about 5 years, 4 or 5 years ago, Andy Hobday of Futsal Miniatures. We've worked together and we've done 4 Baron's War Kickstarters, which are historical, set around the time of King John and the early 1200s. We've done 4 Kickstarters around that, which have been really successful. And around the third one, I was doing some villages where I get to cut loose with my creative stuff
Right.
and do villages. So I did like Cat Weasel. I thought that'd be a great villager to have in a setting. Because my mind always finds things that'll go, oh, that will look great as a miniature, and then those elements. So that's when my mind can then get,
Right.
because yeah, that's when the artistic license will come in. As I'll go, oh, that will make a great miniature, and it might be something completely unrelated to wargaming.
Hmm.
And we thought, while we were we did some Robin Hood figures, we did some outlaws, and we were like, these would be sort of great to do a fantasy range. And we both, because Andy used to be my manager when I worked in the Oxford Street branch of Games
Right.
Workshop back into 1997.
Right.
We've been friends ever since. He's got his first love is fantasy. We've done the Baron's War figures together, and we thought let's do a fantasy range, and see how that goes. But we didn't want it to be high fantasy like Age of Sigmar. We wanted it to be very grounded, and we picked. So we had a really great day of going, right, these are the images I love that I think would look good as elves. So my main reference for sort of the elves were like Renaissance pictures where they kind of depicted Roman soldiers. So what they thought the armor looked like, and it was a cross between Gothic armor and what they thought Romans would wear.
Right.
And it was a real mixture blend. So I was like, I love elements of this, and then some elements of Byzantine stuff. And then we fed it into this amazing AI machine, which was Peter Dennis, the artist.
Right.
So instead of feeding all of this imagery into an AI generator, we gave it to Peter Dennis, who's an illustrator,
Right.
who's worked on
Okay. Good. Yeah. Good.
Osprey books. Yeah.
Right.
So he came back with all of this imagery and some concept work that I just went, that's amazing. My mind then could switch to like working as a historical sculptor,
Hmm.
and kind of use those concepts as kind of like a historic um, images of soldiers, and then I could then use that as my mind then would pick up on that and then produce like a range.
Hmm.
It was a trickier when doing some orcs, because then you've got to try and find the individuality in them. And again, we gave Peter some cues on what we wanted, and then again he sent the artwork back, and then my mind then just went crazy.
Right.
I went, oh, we could do this and this and this, and then I think I got a bit too weird, and then I had to rein it in.
Yeah,
And
I
then
mean
I've
that's.
got
Sorry, go on.
yeah, and then I've got I did some halflings. I think I gave you a couple.
You did, yeah,
Um,
wonderful,
yeah,
really
yeah,
lovely.
yeah. They're for myself because Andy hates all anything halfling, so he won't entertain halflings in our world. Um, so yeah, they're all very Renaissance. They're very much harking back to my um, Games Workshop, my Fantasy Battle Empire army I used to have. Because even back then, everything was either Bretonian or Empire that I was into, because that was the most historically sort of related range. So yeah, we've now gone on to do a Fantasy Barons War Kickstarter. So it's going to be a supplement to the rules that that Andy's written. So it's it's going to add on to that. So, but it's you can use it. The figures are going to be. You can use it for that. You can use it for anything you like. Really, it's not hard and fast.
Yeah. Do you think there'll be more in that fantasy space, or will it go back
Yeah,
to
yeah,
historicals?
definitely. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So this. So since we sold Games Workshop. Since I sold Games Workshop, no. since since I sold Bolt Action Miniatures, I've never had my own range, or nothing serious of my own for a few years. And both myself and Andy are getting to that time when we need to kind of think of what we do post, or what I do post sculpting,
Right.
and especially still playing rugby. If I couldn't work for a period of time, it'd be nice to have something there in the background ticking over. And also, there gets times when I don't particularly want to sculpt. It might be I get to the point, I can't believe it, but I'll get to the point where I might want to have a day off or something, do something completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, because is it quite physically demanding as well?
Yeah, I'm finding it definitely on my hands. My thumbs getting a bit demanding. My eyesight's definitely deteriorated. And if I come in the morning, and if I've been working late the night before, and then I come in the morning, I'll find that my eyes are very blurry, and I have to use. I think when I met you, I was wearing a
Sure,
like an
almost like
Optivisor.
welders kind of
Yeah,
headset,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll be wearing that. I'll wear that, and I definitely have to use that when I'm doing fine, like doing eyes and things like that. So yeah, that all comes in. It's just the onward march of time, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, what do you think then that you would do post sculpting? Or I mean, you may not have thought about it, right? But like,
No, no, I'm
where
not
does
having
the
thought.
do you presumably want to stay in the miniature space, right?
Yeah, I'd like. Well, it's the only thing I've ever known.
Hmm.
I've never, apart from selling wooden floors, when I was 9 times out of 10, I was thinking about making models and stuff like that. I mean, the only other pastime I have, which is playing rugby, but getting to the point of that's not going to last for too much longer because I won't be able to physically run around. And is making model Spitfires, which I took up during lockdown, which have
Right.
yeah, it's about the only things that are sort of really interested in.
Hmm.
Obviously, spending time with the family, they know that.
Sure. So, I mean, you talked a fair bit there about the sort of the act of the sculpting piece. I suppose my sort of
Yeah,
final question, I guess, it would be around almost the art of it, and like what what who, I mean, who are the great sculpting artists that you kind of look up to, and what the sort of legacy of the work might be, I suppose. I don't know if I phrased that as a very as a question that makes sense, but I guess
yeah, yeah.
it's almost the inspirational work, and where you would love your work to, what would you love to inspire from your work down the line as well?
Oh, okay. Well, the people I look up to are all of those Games Workshop late 80s, early 90s. The Perrys, Jess Goodwin, Gary Morley, Trish and Carden, Ali Morrison, Dave Andrew.
Hmm.
Those guys were my rock stars, and luckily I've been so fortunate to meet most of those, and for them to sort of recognize my work, or know that I'm a sculptor too, is like, just meeting your idols, and they've all been fabulous people to meet, and have been very open, and
Hmm.
have recommend, the Perrys have given me hints and tips and stuff like that, which was just blew my mind as a sculptor, when I was starting off. And I mean, they probably don't remember me asking in the queue of people, how do you do straps? Um, but now they, if I see them, they sort of say hello, and
Hmm.
and ask what I'm up to, and then we got to meet Gary Morley and Dave Andrews at PeachyCon. That was like fantastic. And then inspire it. Well, I just want people to enjoy what I make.
Hmm.
This for me is kind of um, I'm very anxious and very, I can get, my mind can flit away with things. So if I can focus on one thing, this is, my kind of therapy. And then to see people actually spend their well-earned money on things I've made gives me a bit of validation. Well,
Hmm.
that I'm not that it's hard. I don't need, I don't need it to exist, but it's nice to know that someone appreciates what I've produced.
Yeah.
And it kind of grounds me into to think in my place in my life, if you see what I mean. It
Sure.
just that that someone when in the US has bought something I've made and has appreciated it and has taken the time to paint it. It gives me a sort of a really good sense of well-being.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if that comes across as
No, I think that makes perfect
douchey
sense. I mean,
or
you're putting stuff out into the world. I mean, it is an art, right? It is an art form, and you're putting that out into the
yeah,
world. And I imagine it is very rewarding to know that people want to receive that art and make use of it and engage with it. I actually
yeah.
lied, Paul. I do have another question. So,
Oh, okay, cool.
and this was just a sort of, I guess, a broader question, and we can sort of see where you want to take it. But the you mentioned a couple of technologies in there as well, and the
Yeah,
sort of, the almost the end of an era of sculpting. So whether that is digital sculpting and the move away from the sort of
yeah, yeah, yeah,
physical act, and then you also you made the joke about AI, and obviously that's coming in more for some people and
yeah.
how they do their concept work. How do you sort of see the technology impacting the work you do, and other sculptors do over the next, I don't know, 10 or 20 years?
Right. Well, it was something I was desperately worried about. Um, Luckily, the amount of work I had didn't give me time to actually sort of think about it too much, because my workload has never diminished.
Hmm.
And fortunately, the companies I work for haven't sort of gone into the digital side.
Hmm.
They've kept sort of in a traditional way. To me, I've been asked if I would like to have a go at doing digital sculpting, and it would. I can see its merits in certain things, like producing weapons and straight line things, which I'm pretty not that keen on doing personally. So I've got a friend of mine who does the straight line stuff physically that I like to use.
Hmm.
I can see his, that side may be suffering more. But like I was saying, that this is something I do as a therapy, and mentally, I couldn't equate doing something on a computer screen as something tactile and
Hmm.
being able to touch and produce, because it's always been, again, going back to being a kid and being amazed that someone's made something big into something small. For me, rightly or wrongly, you're thinking that seems a lot easier to do it on the computer screen than for somebody to be doing it by eye
Hmm.
and just using some tools. And then there's being able to miniaturize something that way, as opposed. And there's some amazing digital sculptors out there, and that's amazing that they can produce products in that, figures in that way. But this is how I want to work.
Hmm.
And I know that's good. It could be an issue in the future, but it does seem like with what you're producing, there's a lot of talking to people like at PeachyCon and other cons. There's still a massive love for that skill of hand produced
Yeah.
figures, and which is heartening.
Hmm.
And me and Andy Hobday went out to Adepticon this year,
Right.
and
Yeah.
we worked on a booth for a friend of mine, Badger Games, and I did some sculpting. And the guys that were coming over and were like, "Oh, I do digital sculpting, but I love you, old man, because you're doing it the old way." Yeah, so there's still a lot of luck, and I don't know if it's something here that it's, oh no, you have to do it the old way or you have to do it the new way. Somewhere we witnessed in America is like, why can't we do it?
Hmm.
I love digital sculpting. I love traditional sculpting. There's a space. It feels like there's a space for it all. Obviously, the being able to produce, buy an STL and then like set your printer to just print off lots of copies of it is a major, and the expense is a major draw for people.
Yeah.
But hopefully, we can find we have looked into being able to find a scanner to scan what I
Right.
produce. And
Oh,
the
right. Okay.
technology is out there, but it's buying a jeweler's scanner,
Right. So
which
like
is a
digitizing
lot.
your the
Yeah, yeah,
handcrafted sculpt.
yeah, which is a lot more expense than we're prepared to pay out at the
Sure.
moment.
Sure.
Yeah, but
Fascinating.
it's just not something I feel like I can add more into something from here, transmits down to my hands into the figure itself. And I'm not sure I'll be able to do that on a computer screen.
Hmm.
I don't think I would have that same connection with the figure.
Sure.
And also, I just envisaged myself sitting on the sofa with a laptop in my pants, watching a film while doing it.
Well, that's Master and Commander. You can put that on and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
enjoy
yeah,
it
yeah.
that way.
Who's to say I'm not in my pants now?
Well, Well, Paul, that has been a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about the work and the
Uh,
art of sculpting.
oh no, I've been a fan of your channel since you started. So
Thank
it's
you.
been a real honour to be asked to be on, and I hope you have some interest in a historical sculptor that sits in his shed all day.
Well, I think it's very interesting. I think hearing more and trying to understand more about the processes that go into creating all of these amazing miniatures, and they are pieces of art. So I think it's great to understand a bit more about it. So I was certainly interested. So thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Huge thanks to Paul for sharing so many insights and stories from his wonderful career and experience. Thank you so much, Paul. If you would like to find out more about Paul's work and check out his Barons War Kickstarter, I've included a link in the description below. Go and check it out. There's some really, really cool stuff there. And if you would like to support the work that I do here, you can check out my Patreon via the link in the description as well. You'll get early and exclusive access to content, regular updates, a Discord server, and of course, my eternal gratitude. And don't forget that you can listen to my interviews as a podcast. Just search for In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery wherever you get your pods, and you should find it. You'll also find other pods as well, the GW Films Club and the GW Books Club. So give them a look. They're really fun, I think. Thank you once again to Paul. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.